fragile truth. Luke 12:2-3. There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs. The detective found me late Thursday afternoon, walking alone along the cracked pavement leading up to the playground. They pulled up in an unmarked car, quiet and slow, the way predators stalk prey. I stopped because stopping felt safer, like moving might provoke something worse. They stepped out and called me over, their voice casual but sharp. There was no menace in their stance, just precision, like this was a move from some well-practiced playbook. They asked about basketball first, who I played with, which courts I liked, the kinds of questions that didn't matter. But then, with an almost lazy movement, they glanced past me toward the group hanging out by the bodega. Jacob stood at the center of them, laughing like he owned the whole world. The detective's next words lingered too long in the air. "You any good? Think you could take them?" They nodded toward Jacob's group, their casual tone a weapon slicing deeper than raised voices ever could. They didn't accuse me of anything, but that didn't matter. The moment I turned out of sight, my mind was already choking on what Jacob might think if he caught wind of that look, that nod. Every second felt like I was swimming upstream against a tide of suspicion that wasn't mine to control. I slipped away from the corner long before sunset, but not before catching a glimpse of Shey Shey. She leaned against the wall of the laundromat, her face turned in my direction, her expression unreadable but focused. She didn't approach me. We didn't speak, but her gaze pinned me in place long after I pulled the door to my building shut behind me. Her silence, her unspoken knowing, dragged at my thoughts with a weight that felt almost unbearable. How much did she understand? How much could she see when she looked at me? That night, my mind unraveled in starts and stops, Elijah's earlier question resurfacing with a cruel persistence. Who benefits from a code that swallows kids whole? It wasn't just words anymore. It was the shadow behind every corner, the intent behind every look. The streets hummed their dangerous lullaby outside my window, but sleep didn't come. I thought about Jacob, his laughter in the darkness, the easy sway of his confidence. I hated him for it in that moment, hated how untouchable he seemed, like the fear that suffocated the rest of us couldn't touch him. And then, just as quickly, I hated myself for envying him. The code protected Jacob because people like me upheld it. But what if Jacob didn't need protecting? What if the code wasn't hiding him? It was hiding something bigger. Friday morning was colder than it should have been for that time of year. The kind of cold that cuts through your skin no matter how deep you burrow into your hoodie. The tension on the block was worse, everyone moving slower, quieter, like they were afraid of cracking the surface of something brittle. When I saw Shey Shey again, leaning against the same lamppost, she didn't bother with small talk. She didn't even bother coming closer. Her voice carried just enough to reach me where I stood, paralyzed by the weight of her words. "You're too quiet, too tense. You know who did it." This time, it wasn't a guess, wasn't an accusation. It was a certainty I could feel in my bones. She didn't wait for me to deny it. She turned and disappeared into the crowd before I could even open my mouth. By the time the cops showed up that evening, half the block already knew something was coming. But knowing and being ready were two different things. The unmarked cars were faster this time, their doors slamming shut in unison like gavel strikes. I was too far to hear the words exchanged, but the image burned itself into my brain. Jacob, standing tall at first, outnumbered but unbroken. His smirk faded as the cuffs clicked around his wrists, a sharp contrast to the swagger he'd carried all week. I thought for a second that he might fight, that he might claw his way free, but no. He went quietly, his head high. He didn't look back as they shoved him into the car, didn't spare the onlookers even a glance, And just like that, Jacob was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and steel doors. The block erupted around me, voices murmuring, choking on disbelief and misplaced anger. I should have felt relief. The supposed shooter was gone, the boogeyman traded to the hands of the system, but the relief didn't come. Instead, I stood frozen, staring after him, my mind clinging to fragments that didn't line up. The Jacob I knew, the one who ruled the block with that sharp laugh and impossible swagger. Had he really pulled the trigger that day, I thought of the way his words had sat heavy in the air, true and certain, yet oddly detached. Jacob had always played the game better than anyone, but this, the more I thought about it, the more something felt wrong. Jacob made threats, yes, but he didn't leave loose ends by getting messier than he had to. A name pressed against the back of my thoughts, another possibility I didn't dare let fully form. After the cops left, I found myself wandering near the playground, the concrete scuffed and scattered with remnants of yesterday's laughter. Elijah was there, sitting on the curb. He looked up as I approached, his usual unreadable expression replaced with something darker. He didn't ask me what I thought, didn't chide me for not speaking out. Instead, he leaned back, his voice cutting through the thick electric silence. They don't take the obvious scapegoat first unless they already know it's not him. His words sent my heart spiraling into freefall. Elijah didn't say anything else, didn't explain or clarify. He just sat there, letting the weight of what he'd said settle on my already overburdened mind. I felt Shey Shey before I saw her that night, some instinct sharpening the air around me. She didn't look at me directly as we crossed paths on the empty street beneath a flickering streetlight, but as she passed, her voice reached me in a low murmur. "You can feel it, can't you? This ain't over." My breath caught, and I turned, ready to call after her, but she was already gone, swallowed by the shadows like she'd never been there. Her words tangled with everything else spinning in my head. Jacob's arrest, Elijah's cryptic hint, the code that tied us all down. The truth was shoving its way to the surface, ugly and relentless, but the worst part was knowing. Once it came into focus, I wouldn't be able to look away. For the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to.